All right. So do me a favor, pull up the notes I sent out this morning. All right. Just a heads up, we're probably not going to finish what I kind of underestimated the amount of time there. Yeah. So what we'll do is I'll probably finish. We'll finish like this, like probably the last half of this tomorrow, and then I'll have you guys pull up the notes that we'll talk about for tomorrow as well. All right. So you'll be submitting 2 things tomorrow. All right. So, but just go through, like, type them out, hold on to them, and then we'll finish. We'll pull them up tomorrow. You guys know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? All right. Again, I'm not just end a sentence, right? Like G. Herbo would end a sentence and then move on. And my 50-year-old white guy would be like, I need clarification. I'm checking for making sure you guys understand what I'm saying. You know what I mean? All right. Okay. All right. So yesterday we were introduced to chapter 11, which, like I said, I flipped 11 and 12 because 11 transitions into 13, and I am going to do just a few little things like Tuesday, Wednesday on 13. No tests or anything like that. Just to kind of tie up the course kind of thing. All right. No tests, just a couple of kind of notes things. So Tuesday will be the last time you'll get any notes from me whatsoever. All right. No problem. And so yesterday we were talking about with 11 here is basically the kind of like Americas and kind of early native cultures and civilizations. So we had talked about with the whole concept of the whole kind of theory of kind of the populating of the Americas dating back to the last great ice age, and that kind of popular theory is that what we classify as Native Americans and these cultures that extend through basically not just North America and South America have their origins in Asia, right? That whole popular theory that the kind of the early Paleo or like archaic peoples as they refer to them, kind of migrated across the Bering Strait, which at the time was a land bridge, right? So we talked about probably the closest to those kind of early kind of like migrants are the Inuit that inhabit the Arctic area, right? Then we had talked about kind of cultures that kind of made permanent settlements like the Anasazi in the American Southwest, and then closer to us like the Hopewell and the Mississippians, right? So we talked about Cahokia, right, which we take for granted, but like I said, at one point, Cahokia, the settlement at Cahokia was Mississippi established, was the largest concentration of people pre-Columbian. Now, if you ever have, unfortunately, if you have to take a world history class in college for whatever that you're going to do, like most of you guys will probably be successful in something other than history. If they use that term pre-Columbian, that means prior to the arrival of Europeans, Columbus, right? So the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, they have to preface that, Cahokia, with that around 1,000 AD with the population, I believe, close to 20,000. It's because of this region. All right, what historians, anthropologists, archaeologists refer to as Mesoamerica. And remember when we were in chapter 2, long back in August there, talked about Mesopotamia. I mean, land between the rivers or middle. Meso is a term that means middle. So this is essentially the area that encompasses central and southern Mexico, as well as parts of what is now Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, places like that. No Nicaragua. Nicaragua, no. But Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico.
That was smooth.
You know what I'm saying?
You slid it in there.
Yeah, thanks. All right. And so this area right here. All right, straight from the kind of Valley of Mexico, which tomorrow we'll spend most of the time talking about the Aztecs. All right. And then today, usually the 2 kind of early civilizations that people tend to focus on are the Mayans and the Aztecs. All right. But prior to those 2 civilizations, there's early civilizations that are going to lay the foundations that are going to be influential. The first one being the Olmecs, all right, which the chapter dates this from kind of 400 AD to 1500. The Olmecs predate that by 1,000 years here. All right. There's evidence of kind of and the Olmecs, the name itself comes, and a lot of these cultures, their names come from the Aztecs, from their language Nahuatl, which means basically rubber people. All right. This area had a kind of a sizable rubber, rubber, forest and that. The Olmecs are going to lay the foundations for a lot. They would use that rubber in these ritual game that's kind of a mix of soccer and volleyball that other cultures are going. Did you ever see that cartoon, Road to El Dorado? You ever see that? People like to focus on it. There was a game that has multiple names in Mesoamerica. The Olmecs were the ones that kind of used that game for ritual purposes. The Olmecs are considered the first kind of Mesoamerican civilization. Their location is around what is now modern day the state of Veracruz into Tabasco there. The two largest sites, which has populations kind of close to what maybe like kind of like Cahokia had, La Venta and San Lorenzo. San Lorenzo is sometimes referred to San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, which gets a little confusing because the original, the Tenochtitlan that everyone talks about are the Aztec ones. These are names given to them by the Spanish. By the time the Spanish arrived, essentially these kind of settlements were basically kind of uninhabited for the most part, right? And so the Olmecs were kind of given this name because of the tribute that they would pay to the Aztec, which was in rubber, all right? And that's what a lot of these kind of cultures, some of these cultures would have that name. So, did you ever watch, I was talking about this, when my kids were younger, Nickelodeon used to have there was like a sports and game channel, whatever, and they would have a game show called Legends of the Hidden Temple. Do you guys ever remember that? The main, like the guy, the kind of Muppet character with the big head that would give the clues was named Olmec. That was from them. And all the team names were associated with animals were kind of found in the location. Now, I'll explain why that character had that was kind of shown as a big head because that's what the Olmecs are kind of known for. All right, so this is the area that we're talking about, like along the Gulf Coast area there. So La Venta, you see San Lorenzo. La Venta's in Tabasco. San Lorenzo is in Veracruz. Like at Cahokia, La Venta, there's an earthen mound they call Pyramid C, which is kind of like as far as like not as large as Cahokia is, but you know, they're still, the theory is what it's used for, so somewhat debatable. But the thing is that the Olmecs, unlike Cahokia, are going to use stone. All right, like a lot of the kind of like the pyramids and those are all kind of earthen mounds here. The Olmecs are the first ones to kind of use stone sculptures. The main thing they're known for are these big colossal heads, which I'll show you an example of. All right, but there's also structured buildings. There's a ball court that uses stone structure that was there in the Olmecs. Now, the thing about, they always say the Mayans are the first ones that have a written language. That's a little confusing because the Mayans had a kind of a written, deciphered language. There's evidence the Olmecs may have had a language. It's kind of based on numbers and kind of numerical form of writing, but it's yet to be deciphered. So we don't know what happened to the Olmecs. We don't know exactly what they were basically kind of like you know what you know their kings or what their social structure was. But they are going to lay the foundation, particularly for the Mayans. They're going to kind of like develop the concept of urban planning and stuff like that. So these are the kind of things that they're known for, these colossal heads, all right? And so there's some controversy with this. I guess I always kind of cite that whole Ancient Alien show because it drives me crazy. They do a two-parter on Mesoamerica, and they focus on this, and like the big focus is like on the face here. There's a focus on the idea that particularly the nose, all right, that doesn't look like those who would typically live in this area. All right, and then looks like they're wearing this figure is wearing a helmet. All right, now in the Ancient Aliens thing, that one guy says that it's a skull cap, that kind of a cap that Russian cosmonauts would wear. All right, that is basically an ancient astronaut. All right, now there's no credentials with that. People who actually have credentials and they like are archaeologists and studies believe that it may be the kind of cap that was worn during the kind of ritual ball game that they would play. But it's debatable because, you know, again, they didn't leave behind kind of any written records here. Do you guys still watch the bus training video, whatever, safety video? They still have that, right? So the kid who narrates that, Gerald, he was a student of mine, graduated, I think it was like 2007 or something like that. Gerald he was in my first hour, I remember. Gerald would usually show up about 15, 20 minutes late if he showed up at all first hour. And then he would go back, sit where Zach's sitting back there, kind of in the back corner, and then he'd go to sleep. I don't know if you guys notice this, but I have the ability to put teenagers to sleep. Like you guys could probably do an entire 8 ball of cocaine and just hopped up and come in here, and I could still put you to sleep. It's a science and an art form, I'd like to say. All right. So my man Gerald wouldn't even like front. He just go back there and just go to sleep. All right. I'm talking about this one day. I remember like it was yesterday. My man Gerald then basically kind of looks up, one eye open, looks up, raises his hand, and I was like, "Oh, Gerald's awake," and he has a question. Okay, I was like, "Yeah." Gerald goes, "I'll put a cigarette out on one of those," and then lays his head back. So I was like, "That was like that's sick. It just can't just let it. I can't just let that sit." So I had to wake him up again. I said, "Gerald, come again? What are you saying?" So apparently in Cozumel, all right, which is a popular kind of tourist site. It's like kind of an island, right, just like kind of east of where Cancun is. There's a replica of one of these, and he put a cigarette on it. And I was like East Coast, West Coast, worldwide, we represent, right? There's actually like probably a 7 or 8 of the original ones there, right? And like how big they are is basically 1.5 old men tall, right? So you're trying to be that's kind of like determining heights of things by using old men, right? So like when somebody say, how tall is the Empire State Building? Well, of course, my answer is 3,462 old men tall. All right, it's a little bit more complicated than the metric system. I haven't really worked out the details per se, but that's to give you an idea, just to give you kind of a scope of that. All right, and then in La Venta, and I think it maybe San Lorenzo, they found these statues. They called this one the grandmother, and the theory is it's probably a little person. Now, back in the day when things weren't so politically correct, we were called midgets. And it believed that essentially that in this culture and like other cultures, not just Mesoamerica, that little people had the ability to kind of transcend into the afterlife, into the underworld. So there was a number of statues like the La Venta, this is the grandmother.
It looks like a rock dude from Frozen.
It does a little bit, yeah. And somebody said, yeah, it looks, yeah, it does a little bit. Well, what was the Lilo and Stitch? Somebody said it looked like one, like the Stitch character. All right. And then another place, this is the city-state that was influential, particularly to the Aztecs, is the place called Teotihuacan. So about 500 years later, after kind of establishing the first Olmec cities, the name itself comes from the Nahuatl term that the Aztecs gave it to the place of the gods. By the time the Aztecs stumbled upon it in the 1300s, it had been about 500 years abandoned. So when they come there and they see this, and it's had relatively, there's in ruins, but there was big temples that were there. They believe the only people who can build it were their gods. All right, so it's going to be a great influence, particularly on Tenochtitlan, which becomes the Aztec capital. There's evidence, based on things that they found there, that from the kind of Gulf Coast region, that they probably traded with the Mayans, pre-classical era. They probably traded with the Olmecs. Now, based on excavations, they believe that the population of this, it was a pretty big city, about 200,000. Which you got to keep in mind, the Cahokia probably had 20,000. This is just kind of a theory here, right? And so when the Aztecs stumbled upon this, they see 2 massive temples. The largest one is called the Pyramid of the Sun, all right, which is a little bit taller than what Cahokia is. At the base, I think Cahokia is a little bit bigger. It was one of the largest structures that was built by kind of like Native Americans in Mesoamerica or South America, all right. And there's another one called the Temple of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Moon. So I'll show you, like, people like this. It's about an hour northeast of Mexico City. A friend of mine was just there a couple of years ago, and it's like you get the extensive tours, and you can go into like kind of there was that band Iron Maiden. You guys ever heard of Iron Maiden? They did like a documentary some years ago. The lead singer of Iron Maiden, Bruce Dickinson, is a pilot. So Iron Maiden toured like in 2011 or something like that, where they basically just toured like on their jet plane, right? And there was one where they went and played in Mexico City, and they went the drummer like got to go into the Pyramid of the Sun, like underneath it. And stuff like that. They believe they found like mercury underneath there, which is a little bit like controversial or whatever. And so this is what it looks like. This is a stone structure, unlike what Cahokia Mounds is, whatever Monk's Mound is. So this is what that looks like from the front there. Keep in mind, these are stone structures that are built without the kind of use of the wheel or beast of burden. All right, you probably had pulley systems to get those up, like kind of like they had before. This is the Pyramid of the Sun is right over here. This is standing on the Pyramid of the Moon. This area right here, this is called the Avenue of the Dead. All right, and they found like kind of some ominous sculptures that are in there, but they believe in here was probably dwellings, home dwellings. And another thing, both the Olmecs and those at Teotihuacan and other kind of Mesoamerican civilizations have this use of a plaza, which has a kind of this sense of communal kind of like for ceremonies and stuff like that. And then this is the view from the Pyramid of the Sun to the Pyramid of the Moon. So like I said, when the Aztecs stumbled upon this, this is basically abandoned, all right? And so when they established their permanent settlement in what is now Mexico City, there's going to be a lot of similarities between Teotihuacan and Tenochtitlan, right? And we don't know exactly what happened at Teotihuacan. We don't know what happened at Cahokia, drought, overpopulation, and stuff like that. But it does have an impact on the Aztecs. And then another culture in the Oaxaca Valley in southern Mexico that existed a little bit after kind of the establishment of Teotihuacan are the Zapotec. Like the Olmecs, this is a name that was basically we get from the Aztecs, and the Nahuatl Zapotecs would have been the people of the Zapote. Mainly, these were names, like I said, that were given by the Aztecs to these cultures for the type of tribute that they would give to them. All right, feathers or fruit or rubber or whatever like that. All right, like with the Olmecs, there was multiple Zapotec kind of settlements. Today, there's a language that's still spoken called Zapotec, right? It's kind of a unique dialect. The largest Zapotec settlement, which population depends on where you get the information, about 30,000 or so, was a place called Mount Alban. Now, this was named by the Spanish, mainly because there were a number of Spanish soldiers that said it resembled a place in northern Italy called Alban. All right, and so the Zapotec are also the last of the native culture in what is Mexico to basically be conquered by the Spanish. All right, they held out even after the Aztecs were defeated. Right, and so this is kind of the area that we're talking about in the Oaxaca Valley there. Mount Alban, it had similarities with this place in Italy because it overlooked kind of like kind of a valley. All right, this is the kind of main plaza area there. Just to give you a scope here, these are like some old men. They're standing there, just to give you an idea how like big like the kind of temple structures were here. I watched a video that was talking about like kind of like Mount Alban, and the guy that was giving the tour basically stood up at this top step here. And he basically showed like kind of the acoustics of the area. Like he basically was talking in a similar voice that I had. You could hear him like through other parts of the settlement. He kind of clapped, and the kind of clapping kind of reverberated. So these were basically these were not just kind of set up, as my mother used to say, willy-nilly. All right, these were basically kind of planned out. All right, there's purposes of these structures and these buildings here. And this is the ball court. All right, that was it's much smaller than the more famous one at Chichen Itza. All right, but again, the ball court was this kind of game was used for ritual kind of ceremonies. I'll talk about that again when we talk about the Chichen Itza. And then they are going to also influence probably the most famous of the kind of like early Mesoamerican civilizations. That's the Maya. I'll play this video that talks about the Mayas and kind of some.
The Maya. They're considered one of the most advanced civilizations to have existed in the Americas before the Spanish conquest. But who exactly were the ancient Maya people, and what led to the collapse of their civilization? As early as 1800 BC, the Maya had begun settling and established villages in what is today Mexico and Central America. Maya civilization peaked from 250 to 900 AD, during what archaeologists call the Classic period. More than 40 cities flourished throughout the region, with populations as large as 50,000. The Maya built magnificent urban centers consisting of stone structures, including pyramid temples that were central to Maya religious practices. In addition to these impressive city structures, agriculture played a key role in Maya civilization. Corn was one of the predominant crops. The Maya creation story tells of nature gods, the basis of Maya religion, who created humans out of yellow and white corn. The Maya also made significant advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They invented the concept of zero, and they developed an accurate calendar system used to guide the Maya agricultural cycles. The calendar was based on observations of the sun and sky over thousands of years. The Maya also developed the only known system of writing in Mesoamerica, hieroglyphs. In fact, much of what we know about ancient Maya civilization comes from deciphering hieroglyphic characters inscribed in pottery, stone slabs, and other ruins discovered at ancient sites. Hieroglyphs have revealed that, despite the Maya's ingenuity and agrarian lifestyle, conflict was prevalent among some Maya city-states as they battled for control of the region. Throughout much of the Classic period, the city-state of Tikal, located in modern-day Guatemala, reigned as the closest thing to an empire in Maya history. But for a period of roughly 130 years, the Tikal people were overtaken through force and diplomacy by the Kanul, a rival kingdom. Toward the end of the Classic period, around 900 AD, most Maya cities had collapsed. Among the theories are warfare, a volcanic eruption, and, perhaps most likely, drought. However, archaeologists still debate why, as new evidence continues to emerge. Despite the decline of ancient Maya civilization, the Maya people have by no means disappeared. More than 7 million Maya are estimated to be alive today in their indigenous homelands and around the world. While they participate in modern global life, they continue to follow agricultural and ceremonial practices of their ancestors.
All right, so the most famous of the early kind of Mesoamerican civilizations are the Mayans, right? So the dates I have there, 300, 900, represent what they call the classical era, which they consider the kind of peak of Mayan civilization. All right, but you have what they call pre-classical, which dates back as early as 1800 BC, and then post-classical, right before the arrival of the Spanish. So like located mainly in Yucatan Peninsula, but also down into kind of like Quintana Roo, down into Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, places like that. The deal is because they have a written language that has been deciphered. In many cases, they consider them kind of the most advanced kind of civilization in Mesoamerica prior to the arrival of Europeans, right? And so this is the area that we're talking about, the Mayan homeland. Now, the Mayans were not like we'll talk about the Aztecs tomorrow. The Aztecs created an empire. The Mayans have a kind of collection of various city-states that all share kind of certain traits like religion and language and stuff like that. But there's evidence of their own kingships and hegemony. We know the names of kings. We know social structure and stuff like that thanks to the written language. During the classical era, probably the most important, like dominant city-state, like the video said, was the city of Tikal, which is located in modern-day Guatemala. Population, like I think they said maybe 50,000, but I've seen anywhere in historically maybe 75 to 80,000, right? Depending on where you're going to get your information. A sizable city, sizable urban center. But like I said, there's evidence that these city-states would kind of fight amongst each other for various kind of areas and kind of dominance within the region. Tikal is also going to be the backdrop in one of the planets in the first Star Wars movie, like with the New Hope, the fourth one there. Like there's a scene in which one of these kind of like, I think one of the kind of like X-Wing fighters or whatever kind of leaves from there. I can't remember what my son would know. But like the thing about a lot of these Mayan cities, and by the time the Spanish arrived, basically the jungle had basically kind of reclaimed these cities, and they were later kind of cleared, is the fact that a lot of these like kind of places are built in the middle of nowhere, built in the middle of rainforests and stuff. So you see a number of temple structures that kind of emerge here, and these temples are very similar to what like the Sumerians would use with ziggurats. They were used for kind of public ceremonies and such. Now, and then like this is kind of artist rendering of what a Mayan city would maybe look like. All right, like I said, multiple structures and stuff. Like in a lot of urban centers, like around the world, people go to cities to engage in like kind of like commercial activity. The Mayans had developed a kind of trading network across Mesoamerica. There's evidence of goods making their way to Teotihuacan, traded within the kind of Olmec territory. Even some goods that made their way up north into kind of what's now Texas and places like that. The Mayans do have a kind of an advanced kind of concept of economics. They would use cacao beans as currency. This is the birthplace of chocolate, all right? And chocolate was primarily as kind of used as a fermented drink mixed with chilies, mainly for the upper elites, all right? Everybody else would use cacao beans to acquire things, all right? To acquire stuff like, you know, like tools or pottery or whatever, right? When I was in Mexico, I was reading this one kind of article that claimed that our word for cash comes to the mind word cash, which means chicken. I've only seen that written in that one thing. I've never seen it kind of in any other thing. It's a theory or whatever. But again, like so, say somebody comes from another planet, they comes down here, and they kind of come to the conclusion, we acquire things by green paper, right? It's what you give value to, all right? Right, that's important. So cacao beans serve that function. And then later, like the Europeans are going to kind of use that to chocolate and add sugar and stuff like that. Right. Also, too, religion is very important. There's an extensive kind of mythology. There's hundreds of deities for everything from corn. There's a deity dedicated to intoxication. That was essentially kind of like there was a drink called balche that was pretty popular. There's a deity dedicated to tattooing. There's multiple deities for everything, and also each state was a living god. So calendars play a big role in religious ceremonies and stuff like that, but also calculating kind of things like as far as like kind of like where the location of planets are. So in 2012, the Mayan calendar was like kind of like that was like kind of the big story, right? Because the calendar, the Mayans developed this kind of essentially these two calendars interlocking. You had a kind of a 260-day religious calendar, all right, that interlocked with a 365-day solar calendar. It also used kind of the observation of planets and stars and the moon. It's a mix of lunar and solar. That's why in many cases, like you have a lot of kind of Mayan cities, basically what we call planetariums for the observation. The planet Venus played a big role in kind of Mayan mythology and stuff like that. So there was that theory that the kind of calculation of the calendar ended, which was equivalent of like December 21st, 2012. I used to show a video that was real ominous talking about that. However, even before that, there was kind of historians and experts that were getting out saying that just means that the thing is starting back over again. The calendar will start back over. So what they did was it broke down into essentially 18 months, all right, for the kind of the solar 65-day calendar. You had 18 months, with each month had like 20 days, and at the end you would have these unlucky days, right? So this is kind of like the disc calendar here, but it was mainly an interlocking of two special calendars, a religious and an everyday calendar. And so these are the months, each of them having a specific kind of deity associated their name with it. And then the last one would be the 5-day month, which was the unlucky day. They often refer to this as the long count calendar, all right, because they're able to predict when like certain stars, constellations, planets would be in the sky. The Mayans wrote stuff down, all right, and so we know that when they have a language, glyphs, hieroglyphs, if you will, this officially deciphered in the middle part of the 20th century. There's a number of these called codices. This one's a Florentine codice, but they look for patterns, all right. Now, at one point, the language was almost completely wiped out. When the Spanish colonized, they found there was a guy named Diego Landa, who was a Catholic priest, that basically when he found out some Mayans were still maintaining the old religion and wanted to get rid of it, he burned a lot of these kind of like codices. Luckily, there's a thick of them that survived. And then you still had glyphs on various kind of archaeological sites. All right. Also, too, the Mayans developed a kind of extensive system of mathematics. The thing, like the video said, is the Mayans, along with the Gupta, developed the concept of zero independently from one another. Our concept of zero comes from the Gupta, all right, because the Gupta are going to pass that on to kind of like that's going to make their way through the Middle East, which makes its way to kind of Europe. That's why they refer to them as Arabic numerals, for the origins in India. All right, the Mayans developed kind of independently this concept where a symbol represents nothing. Right. Now, I used to in the past have a worksheet where it was on Mayan math that I'd have you guys do, but I decided to not do that because I don't want anybody like fighting me, and I don't want to catch hands today. All right, but here's an example of Mayan math. Like the zero was essentially which is basically kind of a shell, almost like a closed eyelid. Like 1 through 4, pretty easy. You have basically horizontal dots. 5's a bar. 6 is a dot over a bar, which makes sense. All right. Now you get down into the 20s here. This is where we start kind of like decimal concept here. So 20 is basically a dot and then a 0. 21, we start to see vertical and horizontal numbers here. All right. 30 is basically 2 dots. Horizontal and a closed eyelid, all right? But mathematics plays a big role in basically kind of observing the stars, when like kind of certain planets would be in the sky. I'm gonna play this video. This is the last thing we'll do here. It's like talking about the middle star, and I'm talking about the mathematics.
Chak Ek rose from the underworld to the surface of the eastern sea and on into the heavens. His brother, Keen Ahau, followed. Though Chak Ek had risen first, Keen Ahau outshone him, and the resentful Chak Ek descended back to the underworld to plot against his brother. In Mayan mythology, Chak Ek represents Venus, and Keen Ahau represents the sun. Known as both the morning and the evening star, Venus moves through the sky, sometimes visible before sunrise, sometimes after sunset, and occasionally not at all. The ancient Maya identified this roughly 584-day cycle more than 1,000 years ago, and it still accurately predicts when and where Venus will appear in the sky around the world. 5 of these cycles make up almost exactly 8 years, and the Maya also recognize this larger cycle. They assigned Chak Ek 5 different forms, one for each cycle of Venus, that were repeated every 8 years. Within the 584-day cycle, Venus is visible in the evening sky for 250 days, then disappears for 8 days before reappearing as a morning star. The ancient Maya ascribed particular significance to this point in the cycle, the first time Venus appeared before sunrise after being invisible. On this day, Chak-ek rose again from the underworld, wielding a spear thrower and darts. To bring discord to the world, he decided to attack his brother and his brother's allies. His first target was Kahwil, god of sustenance and lightning. Rising in the late rainy season, Chak-ek aimed his spear and struck Kahwil, causing damage to the food and a period of chaos in social order until Kahwil was reborn. 584 days after attacking Kahwil, Chak-ek turned his attention back to his brother, the sun. Each night, the sun took the form of jaguar and journeyed through the underworld. Chak-ek speared the jaguar sun as it rose at dawn towards the end of the dry season. The sun was wounded, plunging the world into a period of chaos and warfare. Chak-ek's third victim was the god of maize, who provided sustenance for all humankind. Chak-ek speared him at the time of the harvest. He was buried in the underworld, and maize, the staple of life, was no longer available to Earth's inhabitants. But the maize god emerged after 3 months in the place of new beginnings, an eastern cave known as Seven Water Place, bringing food once again to Earth. When the turtle Aknak rose in the sky to mark the summer solstice, Chak-ek claimed his fourth victim. With the death of this good omen, the sun, the food supply, and the people were buried within the earth, and the forces of chaos reigned. But out of the chaos rose a new order established by Hun Ahau, one of the hero twins known to all for having vanquished the lords of the underworld. A new race of humans was created, made from maize. This state of balance was not to last, however. Chak-ek's fifth and final victim was a mysterious stranger from the west, and his death in the heart of the dry season shook the order established by Hun Ahau. The gods, lords, and maize buried in the underworld.
Prom attendees, please check your email for an important prom document. Attention, National Honor Society members and budget. Thursday, April 29th, which is tomorrow, is the last day to vote for next year's officer.
Sounded like
Make sure you have successful practice to vote. Also, don't forget that.
It's not it was more of like everybody's here. We don't
Followers, the EL tutoring
That's a
includes to win 142 today. EL tutoring.
All right, so I'll finish those notes tomorrow, and then we'll do the one on the Aztecs.